Good afternoon. My name is Daniela Vincenti, and I am a spokesperson for the President of the European Economic and Social Committee, the advisory body of the EU. And but before that, for 10 years, I was editor-in-chief at Euractiv in Brussels. It is a real pleasure to be here and discuss actually a very interesting debate with very very good speakers today on the future of the European neighborhood. The title of the panel obviously obliges us to be somewhat visionary, although in order to build the future, I think we should learn the lessons of the past. However beautiful the strategy, you should occasionally look at the results, said Winston Churchill, and I picked up from one of your books. In recent years, the EU faced not one, but many challenges in the neighborhood. Conflicts in Syria, Ukraine, the implosion of Libya, the migration pressure from the south, economic stagnation and democratic backsliding in many other partner countries, in both in the southern neighborhood and in the eastern neighborhood. No one would argue that one of our pressing challenges is the stabilization of our neighborhood. Conflicts, terrorism, and radicalization threaten us all, but also poverty, corruption, and poor governments are also sources of insecurity and instability. Up to now, it's fair to say that the EU's approach has been, on one side, to maximize its own interests, security and economic interests, sometimes supporting the status quo of repressive regimes. The EU's recent migration deals with North African countries and Turkey are probably the most clear example of that. But at the same time, trying to live up to its proverbial soft power to mainstream democracy in its direct neighborhood can become a challenge. We will discuss whether the neighborhood policy has or has not lived up to its potential, creating concerns sometimes in the public opinion. Anti-immigrant parties and movements have capitalized on citizens' fears to advance their nationalist and anti-EU agenda, and we have seen that in the recent election, yesterday's election. Obviously, they have not massively won, but they have gained ground. So I would say it's now or never to redress the trust and confidence of the public opinion and develop and implement an agenda that restores a keener sense of internal and external security. We heard it this morning from the Secretary of State, said the most pressing need is that we want an the EU to become the safest continent in the world. So the real purpose of this panel is really to have an honest discussion on how can we usher a new era for neighborhood policy and then for the neighborhood. We have Steven Blockmans with us, head of the EU Foreign Policy and head of Institutional Affairs at the Center for European Policy Studies in Brussels. Next to him, Ilkvar Klava, Ambassador and Director General at the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Latvia. Next to him, Adnan Tabatabai, Chief Executive Officer at the Center for Applied Research in partnership with the Orient. He'll be the one addressing the southern neighborhood. Next to him, Vera, and here I'm hope I'm going not to butcher your name, Vera Rihachkova Pashta, Advocacy Manager for the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum and Associated Research Fellow at Europeum, who is our host today. Next to her, Stefan Tricot, Political Director in the Foreign Minister of Romania. And as you know, Romania is holding the presidency of the EU at the moment. So, without further ado, I would like to give Stephen the floor. First, in the 24 hours that asked me to moderate this panel discussion, I went and looked for what you had written about, and it seems you're very skeptical about what has happened up to now. In a recent analysis about the obsolescence of the European Neighbourhood Policy, you said that the ENP is now little more than a fig leaf that tries to impose soft power to the EU periphery, but in reality is nothing else than realpolitik. So, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Where are we going?
Thank you for putting me on the spot and quoting against me with my own words. I see myself more as critically constructive. And I think that also protrudes from the book, if you get a chance to read it. If the question is what's the future of EU neighbourhood policies, then I would say that it depends on the future of the European Union. It depends on the future of the neighbourhood before you can actually try and answer both questions together. I'll be telegraphic. There's a lot to be said, and no doubt my colleagues here will flesh out some of that. As far as the future of the European Union is concerned, well, we see a tussle at the moment between those that advocate for a Europe of nations and those that prefer an integrated, open European Union. We see those that advocate unity, inclusivity, and solidarity, and those who want to raise the EU's level of ambition and would opt for differentiated integration if needed. Of course, that latter element is already present. We see it prominently in the Economic and Monetary Union, with the Eurozone, with the Schengen zone, and now also with defense. And this is unlikely to change anytime soon, I think. Memberships might evolve slightly, but it's not going to change much. And one should add that in some of these, and maybe in the future in all of them, third states already participate, which of course makes, substantively speaking, the three areas which are core to the European integration project, money, borders, defense, fuzzy around the edges, the conceptual edges and the substantive edges. Talking about the future of EU neighbourhood relations, look at the neighbourhood. It will change dramatically over the next couple of years. Brexit, if it happens, will produce a third strategic neighbour on the borders of the European Union, next to Turkey and Ukraine. These are formidable countries, and together they may shape up a different European Union amongst themselves. There are, of course, other neighbours that have to be taken into account, and here indeed I cast a much more wider net than just that of the membership of the European Neighbourhood Policy. I look at the enlargement policy. I already mentioned Turkey. I think Turkey, if we go by the resolution which was passed in the European Parliament recently to formally suspend accession negotiations, we're actually moving in the direction of meeting also citizens' concerns about the future membership of Turkey. And that decision will, I think, come. It should come at one point, because I already think that the fact, the strategic ambiguity which the European Union portrays towards Turkey at the moment is hard enlargement policy towards the Western Balkans, and that should be prioritized. This is an area which is surrounded by EU territory, and which should be integrated, and I think here the French debate about deepening before widening is in fact a wrong one. The EU has already proven in the past, certainly in the moment of acute crisis in 2010, to be able to take a decision on the integration of Croatia, which joined in 2013. Then too, there was a debate about the future of Europe, about reform of Europe. Certainly we could slice in the rest of the Western Balkans. They will not come in one go, but we'll have to, of course, manage the problems that come with that. Looking at the rest, there is the EEA, strong and stable and rich. Georgia has an aspiration. Even Ukrainians have expressed an aspiration to join the European Economic Area. Frankly, I think the differences are so big in economic terms, geopolitical outlook, as well as legal approximation to the European Union, that this is too far-fetched. But there might be a step in between that we need to consider. Is it EFTA, a Swiss model, which is under revision at the moment? I'm not so sure. Maybe an association to EFTA is the closest we can get. The Eastern Partnership itself is, of course, very differentiated in itself. There are 3 countries that have associated, but between them you see the clear differences already, and I highlighted one of them. Russia, Eurasian Economic Union, fragile, and I'll come back to that in a second. The MENA region, that's really hub and spoke, and goes back to the central thesis in the book, which is essentially that the European Union has defined over the last couple of years of crisis, in its own interest, relations with its neighbors on a bilateral basis. This is the classic definition of foreign policy. You don't need a size-fits-all type of European neighborhood policy, which is very weak in its multilateral dimension, apart, of course, from the civil society forum, might I add, that keeps that grouping together. Is it just the framework, or is there more to it? So my point is, which neighborhood are we talking about, and which neighborhood policy are we talking about? It's not a singular concept, and they're not singular policies. There are multiple ones on a bilateral basis. And in fact, the right it's taken the European Union anymore. The shine has gone off its armor. It's geopolitics. And in that sense, the European Union ought to look more strategically at the changing neighborhood, at itself, in the world, and take into account, of course, the interests and the claims of neighbors of our neighbors. And I'm sure that's a point that others will make as well. The final point, I think there's some good news here. The fact that the European Union has a strategic outlook now for China, for Central Asia. This takes into account, the whole connectivity issue, Belt and Roads. At least there's a sort of compass which has been redefined. The EU has an idea about where the landing zone for Brexit negotiations is. We're just waiting for Westminster to make up its mind and join us in that sense. And 22 of the 27 member states are firmly anchored within NATO. And the EU has a strategic working program with NATO. But, and it's a big but, the EU requires, to my mind, and I alluded to that, a strategic reset with Turkey, away from the dysfunctional core which defines its relations now, but a strategic reset around the escape routes which have already been found. Modernization of the customs union, free travel, which is what they want, and energy in the Eastern Mediterranean is something that we need to talk about as well. As far as the partners of the Middle East are concerned, frankly, we need to do that with our strategic allies. Perhaps there's a way around out of the Union for the Mediterranean mindset to go into the League of Arab States, Arab-Euro summit, which we've seen, and beef that up. That's on the Arab side, but that leaves Iran, of course. The EU requires a strategy for Russia. It doesn't have one. It has 5 principles. the Mogherini principles, which have been defined in 2000 and what is it now, 13? No, 14? Well, around that period. Well, these principles can change, of course, to adapt to realities, but what the EU should be doing, to my mind, is to define a strategy which is intent to show the current kleptocratic military intelligence elite in the Kremlin that it is disadvantageous in its interests, in its own interests, to keep its course of action at home in the shared/contested neighborhood and in the European Union, but that its own interests really lie in Europe and not in China. And we can talk more about that if you're interested. So in doing all that, I think it will automatically boil down to a revision of the Eastern Partnership policy which we have. There is a program until 2020 with 20 deliverables. It'll be natural for the new incumbents at the European Action Service and the European Commission to refocus attention on the Eastern Partnership, and I've suggested ways of doing that. So in having this grand view, I think the EU should end its strategic ambiguity towards the Western Balkans, get Macedonia in with the first possible date, which is in June at the European Council. We should not wait for that. The elections in Greece, which have been called for, might actually threaten the future of the enlargement policy in the long run, I think. Western Balkans first, and the rest will come.
Thank you. I feel almost to go back to Romania immediately on this last, because of the June Council and Macedonia, what Stephen has just mentioned, the fact that we need to accelerate Macedonia. Just a quick response on that, on what he just mentioned, and then I'll pass on
that I think the presidency, this presidency has made clear from the outset that it's not pushing or stepping up enlargement, but it's rather keeping our promises, which we took last year in June, to implement them effectively according to the conditions that we explained. We are almost there, but let's wait for tomorrow's report from the Commission. I think that should be the starting point of the debate.
But there is a sense of urgency.
There is a sense of urgency. It's not because of this presidency that we arrived in this very narrow time frame. We understood the political consideration why we cannot move earlier with the package. We have tomorrow the delivery, and hopefully let's see that all member states will show the political will to have a decision at the next General Affairs Council.
Now, I want to go first to Adnan Tabatabai. I would like to go south first before going back east. Of course, you can have a discussion also on the east, Adnan, but Stephen mentioned the soft power and how maybe we need to review a bit what we are doing, because one size does not fit all. And I'm wondering, do you have the sense that the EU should become also a hard power actor to complement the soft power?
Okay, thank you very much for your kind introduction, and to the organizers for inviting me to this impressive forum. As someone who works in a Middle East-oriented think tank in Germany, I obviously would like to discuss the role of Europe in that very region. And I think more than ever there is this discussion about how relevant or irrelevant is Europe in this region, and there is this scathing mismatch between the impact this region can have on Europe and the actual potential for Europe to exert its influence in this region. And I have to admit that when I say Europe, sometimes I refer to member states, sometimes to the E3, sometimes to the European Union. So bear with me that I find it difficult to really have a clear definition. I try my best to point to what I mean in particular fields. So the question really is, and when we look at the European Union, in order to be able to exert more influence in the region, there has been this discussion that we already listened to this morning, I guess, about whether what you just mentioned, Europe needs to develop hard power and whether its soft power is not enough. And I would hold the view that one really should not downplay the value of European soft power. And the reason for this soft power, and I speak as someone who travels the region of the Middle East regularly, and I have been hearing a lot of positive views on Europe, on the European Union as an institution. It's a bit less because obviously there's not enough knowledge, but the views on Europe are much more positive than, for example, in comparison to the United States or Russia or China. And the reason for that is quite simple. In the absence of the use of hard power, your soft power might actually increase. There is, in the people's minds of the region, a difference in seeing people in uniforms, on a tank, on an armored vehicle, or in a jet above your heads, or if you have people coming from Europe who are teachers, development aid workers. It is a big difference in Afghanistan if you have Germans who are there to train the police, or if you have uniformed troops from other countries who are actually fighting in the battles. So it is really important not to downplay the achievement of being, so to speak, liked in the Middle East. You may, if you are an actor with much more hard power, you may be feared in the Middle East and therefore automatically also more influential. And this is obviously a very reductionist distinction between being liked and being feared and being respected, etc. But to me, it felt like in the past months and 1 or 2 years that I followed the discussions, that this value of being an actor with a lot of soft power, that in fact means that Europe is respected as an actor of academic opportunities, economic prosperity, obviously things like the developmental aid that comes from Europe, capacity building and training. These are things that Europe is held in high regard for in that region. And one, as a European, as someone who looks at European policy, should never underestimate the value of that. And therefore, when there are discussions about a European army or an army of Europeans, as Germany's defense minister likes to call it, one should bear in mind that that might come at the expense of soft power. With regards to European interests in the region, I obviously second what Stephen Blockmans has said, and we had these discussions earlier together. Europe obviously has to be much more specific about what its interests are, has to be much more realistic with regards to what its interests are, and has to think about who are actors in the region of the Middle East that might either proactively try to undermine European interest or do in fact act against the interests of Europe. And I think you would agree with me that actors like China, Russia, or regional powers such as Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, there has been this discussion in Europe that these actors might not share European values and interests, or in fact even harm those. What we haven't been hearing a lot, however, in my view, is that we also have the situation that US influence in the region might be not in the interest of Europe. And this is particularly the case, I guess, with the current administration in Washington. This is not to say that it's all to be blamed on the US, but that the US as an actor that might not go in line with core European interests is something that needs to be more defined in Europe. And I guess overall there is the need for new approaches towards the region that overcome certain binaries that I want to refer to. The one binary I hinted at already is the one of being either value-oriented or interest-oriented. And there is no real secret in that the answer to this must be that you have to be value and interest-oriented, and that being value-oriented in itself can be of interest to the European Union as a global power. So I would reject this notion of you are either interest-driven, for example, your interest is in having a stable North African extended neighborhood, and therefore you support tyrants who govern in, let's say, Egypt or elsewhere. This can obviously not be the answer to this question. It has to be a complementary approach. The second binary that I would like to challenge here is that the discussions we've heard in the past, again, 1 or 2 years, I would say, of Europe being either a self-reliant actor or being committed to the transatlantic bond. And again, I would say both has to be possible. It has to be possible to be self-reliant in economic terms, maybe even in defense terms, while at the same time expressing the commitment to transatlantic relations. I in fact want to conclude my input with 2 specific cases where there have also been quite, I guess, worthy publications on, and the one is the whole discussion about the nuclear agreement with Iran, where Europe has been a key arbiter in the whole negotiations that started back in 2003. One may argue that the United States and Iran had been the key actors here, but Europe was central in coordinating the other world powers for this agreement, and for Europe this was about nuclear non-proliferation in its neighborhood, in the neighborhood of the Middle East, which for the Europeans has been a key security issue. Here, in order to be able to safeguard the achievement of the nuclear agreement, a recent paper that has been published by our organization, by CARPO, refers to the possibilities of EU and China to seek complementary action to safeguard the deal by having economic trade with Iran. And the reason I mention this is that obviously there are, in terms of values, big problems in European-Chinese relations, but maybe some form of complementary, not complementary, but complementary action can help to channel some Chinese-Iranian trade through the European channel of Instex. I won't go into further detail here, but this may help to, in fact, ensure that the achievement of Europe, which was the nuclear agreement in partnership with other world powers, can be safeguarded. We can go into detail later if that's of interest. The second point would be the whole discussion about the context of Syria. Obviously, the soft power of Europe of being an important economic player and an actor for development in Syria has been on the table, but there are obviously other actors that exert their influence on Syria, and a recent publication by the Bertelsmann Foundation actually discusses how Europe has to view this conflict also through the lenses of stakeholders in Syria, such as Russia, the United States, Israel, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. This makes the whole equation much more complex, obviously, but I think there is no way around seeking that comprehensive approach and trying to overcome issues that might be obstacles to complementary action and cooperation with these actors. But I guess unless there is this willingness to be more realistic, more pragmatic, this won't be possible for Europe to achieve.
Thank you, Adnan. And now I would like to turn to Mr. Klava. We heard, the struggle sometimes between interest and values. In terms of, we're celebrating this year the 10th anniversary of the Eastern Partnership. And do you really think we're succeeding there in combining the two? And also maybe since Stephen has spoken about a strategy for Russia, look at that. How can we extricate how the EU can extricate itself from the constant competition in the neighborhood with Russia?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity to address this audience and being invited to this prominent event, this conference, this European Summit here in Prague. I would say, if I'm asked how successful we are in Eastern Partnership process, I would say it's definitely partial success. Degree, we can differ in opinions to what a degree it's success, but definitely when we look at the achievements, signed association agreements, deep comprehensive free trade agreements with 3 frontrunner countries in Eastern Partnership process, Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, bringing those countries together in closer cooperation with European Union, I would subscribe that it's definitely a successful move from the point of view of the European Union, from the point of interest of European Union. Well, what I would wish for is that we as a European Union, of course, that we would have a strategic approach. I fully subscribe that we have to define the strategy towards Russia, but we have to define also more precisely, more fine-tuned strategic approach towards Eastern neighborhood. Namely, what we are aiming at there, to what end we are working there, what's the aim. I would say that, and I subscribe here to what Stephen said, that it's about geopolitics. In the end, it's about that. I would say that bearing in mind long-term perspective and global economic competition, it is of importance who exactly will tap into resources of that region, who will make an impact there, and it will make a difference who will do that, be it China, Russia, or Europe. Will it remain our neighborhood, or it will be someone else's neighborhood? That's a big question mark. Of course, at the moment, this more strategic, more precisely formulated approach is difficult, rather, for obvious reasons, because we have been busy with more urgent processes taking place inside the European Union, like Brexit, like discussions about the future of Europe. And that would probably be perhaps too much to ask to have a far-reaching clarity about the outside of the regions outside of the European Union. But what is important, it is important that the European Eastern Partnership process continues. It must be continued. It's for the Eastern partners, definitely it is the best game in town at the moment, and perhaps for some it's the only game in town, to be honest. So, and reforms must go on. If I may say a couple of words about the Eastern neighbors themselves, well, we have to acknowledge that it's their choice. It's their decision where they are going, where their countries will be going, which direction they will take. It makes it difficult for them to decide about the future action for these countries, because just let's see, even if they reform successfully, there is no guarantee at the moment that they will become members of the European Union. And not at all. And it makes the whole reform process, or motivation, or motivating their societies to proceed with reforms even more difficult, more complex. But we have to tell them also that it's to their own benefit. Reforms make them stronger. Reforms make them more politically stable, more sustainable in terms of economic development. About the spoilers or outside challenges where we have to compete with competitors, strong competitors. First of all, of course, there is inside competition, and let's be honest, we are talking about oligarchs or business interest groups specifically within these countries, Eastern neighboring countries, who see dangers in political, legal, economic reform process, because they see risks for themselves, because being ousted by anti-corruption fight or strengthening rule of law, and which will definitely decrease their freedom of action, how they operate, how they do business, how they make profits. And what's good for a nation, it might not be good for a specific business interest group or specific oligarch. And there comes in outside spoilers or outside competition, if you will, and it does exist. First of all, what comes in mind, of course, obviously, because of geography and the past, political past, it's Russia, obviously. But in a longer perspective, I would tend to say that in political, but more so in economic field, Russia is rather an example for these Eastern neighborhood countries, rather an example how not to do things, because if we look the way things are done in Russia, which means that existing economic model is not really sustainable in the longer run. It cannot provide, there are limits, and it cannot provide a better alternative in terms of living standard to Eastern neighborhood countries, a better alternative than the European Union can provide. That's clear. The Russian model can provide benefits in terms of lucrative business contracts to individuals in political and business elite in these countries, but not to the society on the whole. But Russia is not probably a long-term challenge or long-term competition to European Union. What is really a long-term competition, long-term challenge, or spoiler, it is, of course, China. Because why? Because China provides successful, so far, alternative in the way that a country and society that is not liberal market economy and not multi-party democracy, that it can succeed economically, and this presents conceptual challenge for everyone, also for European Union. So in the longer run, I would say China is even bigger competitor than Russia in the Eastern neighborhood. I will stop here. Thank you.
Especially probably with the One Belt, One Road strategy that will bring the neighborhood closer to Europe.
Yeah.
Now I'm turning to Stefan Tinka. So we heard it's all about geopolitics, and I'm wondering if in your 6 months experience in the presidency, if you have seen really the policy, the neighborhood policy move, whether on the south or on the east, and you should already probably have an idea of where we can accelerate initiatives or activities in the next 6 months for your Finnish colleagues. Please.
Well, thank you very much. I think we should make clear from the outset that neighborhood policy as such is done together with institutions in Brussels. The presidency is more in question marks, but still we had a role to play and we're playing apart from enlargement. So the idea was to work together with these institutions to see where we can bring something new, something valuable on the table, and to use or harness the right context to move some things. Of course, neighborhood as a whole, from the Arctic to Maghreb, is no secret that for us, which are at the borders of Europe, should have been high on the agenda. On the south, a very good presentation was made here. Unfortunately, the context was not permissive to move on something ambitious. We have two crises, two wars, Libya and Syria, and we have a much expected peace plan on the Middle East. So against this background, we didn't see a context which was conducive to imagine something meaningful on the south. On the east, it was a different story. So we had on the one hand, but let me start by making myself clear that I fully agree the need to be more strategic and look at our real interest when it comes to the neighborhood as a whole. We have been looking too much on institutional arrangements, norms. Values are important, but we also need to look at our interest, because at least three giants of this world are looking very strategic and with clear ideas on our neighborhood. why was neighborhood there? Not because of our geographic location, because of our firm belief that to be a global actor, you need to be relevant in your immediate neighborhood, beyond your borders. And what started as a policy to set out a ring of friends, as you mentioned at the beginning, it turned out to be a ring of problems. And why did we end up here? I think, on one hand, we ended up here because of our own. What happened in Europe these past 15 years? Migration was mentioned, Brexit was mentioned, and the UK is very important in the balance, in the current balance of the EU when it comes to neighborhood policy. If Brexit will occur, there will be a new equilibrium inside Europe. Populism, the extreme parties, issues like enlargement or even something which resembles enlargement is fueling these movements in Europe. So of course, against desire, when you also have European elections, it's a bit tough to promote issues like what to do with the Eastern Partnership on the long term. But still, the idea was to keep awareness that we have a neighborhood policy. On the Eastern Partnership, and I'm glad we are here in this beautiful city where 10 years ago Eastern Partnership was born, here in Prague. We've managed to do this anniversary event in Brussels earlier this month, and it's good to keep this as a be aware for the other Europeans, especially now that we are changing institutions. But we wanted also to go beyond that and start a kind of a reflection, and I think also instances like this one would have to play a role in the months to come to think where we go beyond 2020. Because we have now the DCFTA, visa-free with number of countries, this would be the threshold. Should we go further than that, to generalize the four freedoms, the internal market, access to the energy market, digital market? So how far can we go, if we can go for the next decade? Then touch the issue of values, very important, but again, the balance between values and interests. And finally, which is linked to the two, is the degree of convergence. Why am I saying this? The DCFTAs are an excellent instrument. This is the threshold. But we see that the impact of these free trade agreements did not reach all the segments of the society. The countryside, the poor people, there are still divisions, and this is vulnerable. And we saw 2 elections in the region which are at the limit. So we will need to make sure that not only we generalize and implement these DCFTAs, but also that the benefits of DCFTAs reach as much as possible the entire society. This is crucial. So this is why I also insist on the issue of convergence. It's a lessons learned from our enlargement as well. And finally, the question of the strategic view. We had the summit in Sibiu 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, which, when it was announced, had a different meaning. It was supposed to take place immediately after Brexit, which was not the case. It prepared the future strategic agenda. And I see the title, What Future of the European Neighbourhood? I think very much easy. We could ask, what is the place of neighbourhood in the future of Europe? And yes, totally agree with the first speaker that the debate will deepening before enlargement. This is really a nonsense. We want to agree among ourselves that we have a place in the future of Europe for enlargement, for neighborhood policy. Elections have passed. Yes, in some countries they left some scars, but now we should talk seriously about this issue, because we have others. I mean, yes, they are taking profits, the Russians, the Chinese, of our problems around the neighbors. Okay. While Russia tries to define a kind of encirclement, China is trying to control the gateways to Europe. So I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm turning now to, you mentioned civil society and how we should definitely try to work much more on the ground, as much as just looking at the geopolitics and at the political and institutional level. So I'm turning now to Vera Ryachkova-Pashta to maybe give a quick overview of how we have worked so far, and if there is much more aggressive, but aggressive in a larger sense, on how the EU can be much more into the grassroots than it has been up to now.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation as well to this distinguished conference, and especially to this panel, which is, I think, a great opportunity for me personally, since I'm working mostly on the Eastern Partnership, multilateral policy and Eastern Partnership region, to see the whole neighborhood policy in the wider perspective, and also see that the colleagues from the southern dimension have a similar experience, I would like to say, as sometimes the civil society in the Eastern Partnership would like to underline. And here, I mean, I really haven't prepared anything concise, so I'm a bit afraid I will be a bit rambling, but I will try to also respond to your question, but I also made some points as the other speakers before me raised issues which are of extreme importance or interest. So basically what I noted down was that the EU shouldn't be worried to be liked in the Middle East, and I think this echoes also the situation in the Eastern Partnership, and especially if we look from the point of view of the citizens of these countries. So, and also one of the speakers before me mentioned that the policy should be framed also from the point of view what the countries want, what the partner countries want. The relation should be about the real partnership which goes both ways, right? So that's at least from the perspective of the civil society. So we have this big geographic, geopolitical game which is there and which will always be there, but we shouldn't forget about the people on the ground and that I mean, it might sound a bit cheesy, but we really want to make their life better, right? So that's why we are delivering reforms. That's why, as an EU, we are trying to promote principles and values, which are basically then will be based their societies and how they function on the principles like rule of law, which is crucial, and also will tackle the recurrent problems in the region like corruption. So this is what the citizens in, I would say, all 6 EAP countries I am working on are looking for. They are looking for rule of law, they are looking for justice, if you like, and they would really love to have their societies corruption-free. And here we can see that the policy, the Eastern Partnership policy more specifically, has not delivered in an optimal way, I would say. Another point I would like to make is on regionalization. So Stephen made a point that my organization, the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum, is one of the elements of the regional policy, which is kind of which has been successful, if you like, in the terms that it really boosted contact among the civil society actors across the regions and among the countries, where sometimes the contact is quite difficult. In the view of the civil society, this aspect of regionalization, which is mirrored at the level of the EU policies with this multilateral structure which is in place. So the so-called Eastern Partnership platforms and panels, where everybody meets and discusses the implementation of the policy. It has a huge socialization aspect and impact on how the societies are getting closer to each other, and consequently they are getting, thanks to this increased contact and relationships, they are getting more stronger and resilient. So this boost of regionalization should be one of the priorities for the policy after 2020, and should be more mirrored in the new roadmap, which was already mentioned by some of my predecessors. Then I would like to make a point on the prioritization of the policy. So basically, the new European Commission, which will come into the office in the autumn, most likely they will also run the ENP review, so we will see the new ideas coming up. We are also seeing this generation of new ideas in relation to the Eastern Partnership and the new roadmap. I would say the major issue here is that basically there is no agreement among the EU member states what should be the finalité of the policy, which is kind of an element which is really making very complicated this exercise of how the new policy should be designed. At the same time, and this was already raised here many times, if I recall correctly, there is the new multi-annual financial framework being discussed in Brussels, and here we have an interesting development because what was proposed in terms of how the neighborhood policy will be funded is to create one major instrument, the so-called NDICI, Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument. And this instrument would somehow swallow, with the exception of pre-accession support, will swallow all financial support the EU is dedicating to the so-called third countries. From the perspective of the Eastern Partnership, which, as was already mentioned before, many countries in this region have higher aspiration. Many of them have very strong bilateral contractual obligations under association agreements, and also Armenia recently, not so recently, a year ago, concluded SEPA agreement, and so many obligations which are stemming from these contractual obligations are even stronger than, for example, under the current Brexit deal, the UK would be obliged to vis-à-vis the European Union. And we are at a point where basically this new instrument, which also kind of entails the funding for the whole neighborhood, would kind of cover the whole portfolio of the third countries without really underlining the importance of the region, not only vis-à-vis them, but also to other players in the international arena. So by having this single instrument, the EU is somehow voluntarily decreasing, I would say, its leverage and its kind of, signal it sends to the whole world, how it projects its interests and power vis-à-vis, especially the Eastern neighborhood. So, and consequently, if this new instrument, which is still debated by the member states, and the debate has not been concluded, so if this single instrument is there, with major objectives being support to development goals, which are of course important, migration and stability, and here we are back to this issue of dilemma between stability versus soft power values and democratization as a priority for the EU. Then it can have consequences also in terms of internal governance of the European Commission, and I'm stopping here, which basically means that the independent DG NEAR, which was there to support the neighboring countries and also the pre-accession countries, will be somehow merged with DG DEFCO. So also structurally, I mean, from our point of view, from civil society point of view, this poses some questions in terms of consequences for the policy implementation after this new commission and the new instrument is in place. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I would like, now we have 20 minutes roughly for question and answers. I would like to turn to the floor to see if there are any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to go to Slido. We'll break the ice first with the Slido then. I would like to take an institutional question, since we are today European leaders are in Brussels trying to figure out what to do with the next commission and decide for the top jobs. But also that will definitely make an impact on how the setup of the next Commission. And there is an interesting, there are two interesting institutional questions. One is, at the beginning of his mandate, Juncker clearly stated that there would be no enlargement during his term of office. What should the new Commission President say? And I would like to couple it maybe with another question that I come up with, because as you know, in the past we had enlargement and neighborhood policy separated in the Commission. Now they are grouped. And I wonder if that has had an impact on how far we have gone on enlargement, and whether that should be decoupled again and have a commissioner and for enlargement, a commissioner for neighborhood policy. Who would like to answer? Maybe Stephen?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, which has political ramifications, of course. You're right to say that under Barroso the two were split and of course prioritized enlargement. My argument at the very end of my introductory remarks is that the Western Balkans, with a pre-accession promise, should be kept on that track, and that the decision and also Juncker's statement at the beginning of his mandate has in fact been counterproductive in that sense. It is basically dissipated steam for reform in those countries, and we see the consequences. I'm not saying this is only the consequence of Mr. Juncker's statement, or from the EU for that matter, but it has allowed for slackers and people with devious interests to serve their private interests, in fact. My feel that there are other suggestions out there that DG NEAR should be turned into a DG membership, so as to deal with both entry and exit issues. I think that would be a bad signal for two reasons. One, that the Commission would be prepared to deal with other exits, which I think is a signal that we want to avoid at any cost. And second, that this would only be for membership prospective countries, which would carve out the Eastern Partnership countries, which theoretically could meet the Article 49 membership criteria. I think that's already, legally speaking, a difficult proposition. My suggestion would be, and in fact this is sloshing around on the grapevine, at least in Brussels, is that there should be a DG Europe. A DG Europe which deals with all European neighbourhood issues: West, Britain, North, Arctic, Norway, EEA, Switzerland, microstates, Western Balkans, Turkey, Eastern Partnership. And that the South, the MENA region, but I'm not sure what Adnan would think of this, would indeed be relegated to DG DEFCO / European External Action Service. I think that would be an element, at least, that gives political prominence to European neighbourhood issues, where enlargements should still be prioritized within a bigger DG Europe.
Interesting. Anyone else would like to answer the question? Regarding enlargement, whether the next Commission will actually do much more in terms of enlargement. And maybe if I can take also another question that is in the vein of what I was asking to Stefan before, is, do you believe that the Council will agree on opening accession negotiation with North Macedonia and Albania this month?
Well, let's pray that
let's wait
happens.
and see. Okay, I tried to badly to get an answer. Let's wait.
The point that I'm trying to make, and to link with the first answer, that we have already half of a commitment last year. What to do about it? One of the few success stories in the wider neighborhood. I mean, we don't have that many. Yeah, we have Armenia, something mixed, Moldova, Ukraine. But the real success story is the Prespa agreement. And what is impressive about Prespa agreement is that it took political courage of both sides at a time where everybody is thinking, I mean, most politicians are looking only to the immediate future, votes, elections. It took a great deal of courage to get this agreement. Macedonia, North Macedonia has managed to keep up the reforms because they have engaged in the 369 and so on. So they have delivered. Now I think it's EU's turn to deliver. This was my main point. I mean, there is also a moral issue here.
Can I add one thought about this?
Can I ask another question, a follow-up question, and then I'll let you do? Because who is the main blocker of EU enlargement at this point? Paris, The Hague, or Berlin?
Paris.
So, okay.
Not
at least
Germany.
we have a clear
No,
answer.
can I say this year?
this year it's Paris. Well, I mean,
They are moving.
France, apart from Greece in 81, or prior to that, has always been against enlargement in principle because they focused on integration, on deepening of the European Union. So it's not a novel position that they take. Germany actually has a problem that they might inherit in their upcoming presidency and would rather see resolved before that. But I pointed out the Greek elections, which I think puts extra pressure on the Romanian, the Finnish, the Croatian and the German current and upcoming presidencies to put pressure on Paris to accept that Macedonia has delivered its kind of a deal and to understand that the decision in June does not mean accession of Macedonia immediately. If Turkey is anything to go by, they should be convinced that this can take a very long time and that there are multiple benchmarks on the way that need to be resolved. I think strategically it would be a mistake to kick the can further down the road, not just because of the Greek elections, but also the momentum will be lost within the European Union. And that would be a strategic missed opportunity of colossal format.
Colossal.
If I may add a little bit, well, here we had just an answer, I mean, to the question that the institutions in Brussels, they play is sort of whether you have a DG Europe or not have a DG Europe, that's a supplementary role. But the real answer, it lies in the capitals of European countries, of member states, I mean, about the enlargement.
Clear. Any question from the floor at this point? No, I don't see any. So I'll continue. Adnan, there is a question about the southern neighborhood and the southern border of Europe. The question is from, and had five thumbs up. Can the EU secure its southern border through political means?
Well, I think I'm not sure whether I get that question right, but I would just turn it into what I would like it to be, in saying that I strongly believe that these political means have their limits, but it's not that Europe lacks these means. I guess something like, again, the nuclear agreement with Iran in an extended meaning of what it actually was about was supposed to secure a region which is an extended neighborhood from which in 2015 a lot of refugees had to come to Europe to basically survive. Stability in that region and any minor step towards stability in that region is something that is worth spending a lot of diplomatic and political brain cells into. And I guess that, again, the nuclear agreement was a political agreement, solely relying on a diplomatic effort, which started in 2003, and it took all sides so long. Now you can obviously say, as it is unraveling, political means don't seem to be enough. But I would always challenge this view and also say that these experiences experiences are necessary to develop further mechanisms to safeguard the political achievement. And in this particular case, it's about economic incentives, economic self-reliance, economic independence vis-à-vis US policies. And for that, Europe and the European Union needs time. And I think one has to take this time factor into account. Paradigm shifts that happen need time in order to be translated into operational policies. So this experience now is very, very new for Europe, and but I would never say that Europe has not enough political means to achieve it. It has to learn how to really use them.
Mr. Clara?
But the question was about migration, yeah, right?
No,
or more general?
It is more, well, secure the borders. No, it was more general. I read it in more general terms.
Okay, but just one remark. I mean that definitely the question is whether we can manage or not. I think the answer to that is still pending. But the one thing is clear: we have to engage. We have to help southern Mediterranean countries in managing this situation, because they are facing the pressure as far as both migration from the rest of the continent is taking place, and they feel the pressure there in southern Mediterranean countries, people coming from other countries to them, and in hopes also to cross over to Europe. But the other thing is also there are non-state actors which they have. There are risks, and we can see also in situation in Libya, for instance, what's going there, and of course Europe has to do more and has to engage in this situation.
I have two follow-up questions here. One is from Slido. Should initiatives like the Union for the Mediterranean be revived and used more effectively to secure EU interest in its neighborhood? So obviously, maybe this is for Anand and you on civil society, because a lot of the projects implemented by the Union for the Mediterranean are done with universities, civil society, organization, etc. So should it be revived? Is it actually functioning properly to its full potential, or something can be done for it? Please.
I can start from the civil society point of view, or at the civil society level. So basically, I am aware of the fact that now there are ongoing. There is an ongoing project which is trying to establish a network of organizations which would be similar to the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum, specifically with this purpose to boost the civil society cooperation in the region and across with the counterparts from the EU countries. This being said, it's not the first time. There have been such attempts in the past as well. From my personal capacity, I remember several times, at least 2 times, where we attended the events of this regional network, and we were sharing experience from the Eastern Partnership with our colleagues from the Mediterranean. So in terms of like assessing success or impact of this initiative, I don't feel really informed enough to deliver you some kind of sound assessment, but I would say the structure is not at the level, for example, what we are seeing in the Eastern Neighbourhood in terms of the forum. But there are many lessons learned we can share, and we are ready to cooperate.
I would basically add to that that it should be continued, it should be broadened, in the sense that when when European institutions or Europeans hope to see pluralistic societies in the southern neighborhood, the countries of that region has to be engaged in pluralistic manner as well. The one weakness that I observed in some projects that I was either involved in or heard about, particularly in Tunisia, in Egypt, in 2011, 12, 13, was that these initiatives were quite selective, very much capital-focused, which is a natural phenomenon. I don't want to be judgmental here, but usually people who speak proper English, people who have been educated in European capitals, it had some sort of a self-affirmative echo chamber kind of a bubble effect, which has to be widened and broadened. If every part of society in these countries is supposed to be convinced of some of the things the European Union or Europe stands for, those also need to be engaged where Europeans would think, these are not the friends of Europe, but maybe they can in the future be partners of Europe or extended friends of Europe. But in any case, one should never view these countries, be it the political elites and the political fractions, but also the civil society group. One should never have an exclusive look. One should always try to be as pluralistic as possible, because this kind of pluralism is what actually makes Europe so fascinating. And that is the approach that I would hope would be at hand as a lessons learned. When, for example, now Algeria and Sudan, some refer to this as an extension of what we saw in 2011. This is obviously an early assessment, but I guess that should be a lessons learned from the earlier experiences after the Arab Spring.
I made a little hint to this in my opening remarks. What is missing here is the political dimension of the UFM. It's a project-based organization. It does some good work, but it's sporadic. The Euro-Arab League summit of earlier this year brings the possibility of renewed political capital, which is delivered to the Mediterranean and the Arab world by extension, in a way, with the possibility of funding as well. You could foresee the EBRD, European Development Banks, Gulf funds, basically pouring in money into a sort of ASEF. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. This is the Asia-Europe Foundation, which supports the annual Asia-Europe meeting, which is a political thing. The foundation itself is much more active and much more coherent in rolling out with bigger sums projects across the Eurasian the Eurasian landmass, and I think something similar could be constructed around and buttressing basically the budding Euro-Arab summit.
I'm going to go for the last question, and there are two questions on China. Obviously, we mentioned China, the elephant in the room here, and then we'll come to a close. What step should the EU take to compete successfully with China in the Eastern Partnership region? Do you think the member states are all well aware of the potential threats from China, and how should they respond? Well, I suppose
we can spend the whole panel on that.
Yeah, it's a very large question.
I think the proposition to compete is the wrong thing. We should work together, and we should find ways to bring the Chinese and the massive funds which they have into compliance with our own rules and in complementarity with the ambitions we have for our shared neighborhood.
Yeah, that would be an excellent solution, of course.
But do we need, because at the moment we have a lot of initiatives and strategy, and do we need maybe to come up with a more systematic approach on trade and political strategy, putting it together, actually, not just separating it?
Yes. The answer would be yes. But we have EU-China summit, for instance, where these topics are being discussed to an extent, maybe going into more specifics in future. But of course, ideal solution, if it's possible in real life, ideal solution would be a cooperation in that region. But how it is achievable, I mean, it is a conceptual challenge for everyone, China, and how to deal with that. And we are just looking for answers, but definitely There are countries also within the Eastern Neighbourhood countries that are leaning very much in hopes towards China, seeking for solutions. And for instance, if you look at Belarus, the Belarus looks to China as a sort of compensator in this geopolitical game, Russia, China, Belarus, and seeking economic benefits from that, and political benefits also to some extent.
Just 1 minute. We discussed this semester very much about China, because I want to answer to your second question, if there is awareness now. I hope there is, because Huawei 5G were just the tip of the iceberg. There is the security dimension and so on, but the biggest drama is that we discover that although technologically capable, we don't have the industry. And IT is just the first sector. There are others coming, so we really need to look at our industrial base. And this is where the strategy on China should start. Just to answer to a new strategy on Russia, I'm not sure, but clearly we need one on China.
One for China, where we put everything that we have done up to now into one cluster. Okay, now, is there any question? No? So we're coming to a close. I would like, though, before ending and letting everyone go, you have a new commission and commission president, supposedly, coming up in the next month, being selected probably today, or maybe not. If you had one suggestion or one recommendation to the next Commission President for the neighborhood, and I know it's a difficult question to answer, because which neighborhood, but just neighborhood as a whole, which one would that be? And I'm going to start from you first, since you were the last to start off, Vera.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege. Well, basically, my recommendation probably would be that in order to have sustainable reforms in the neighborhood, which we really want to, if the ultimate goal is stabilization, this is indispensable to have societies which are working towards implementation of successful reforms. Then the Commission and the EU has to work with all spectrum of actors in those societies. So not only with the governments, because in some countries this is a bit tricky, but not also only with the civil society, but indeed covering all actors across the whole, I mean, starting with the grassroots, going up to those who are at the policy-making level, because only this will kind of assure that the process towards sustainable reforms, which are not backsliding, that's the only guarantee. Yeah.
Stefan?
For the next commissioner on
the Commission President, which recommendation?
I think I will save my question for the next Vice President, High Representative.
Well, which one would that be?
Well,
which recommendation?
Let's try to make the external action, including neighborhood, more effective and more together with member states. CFSP is still of the member states. They also have to play their role. So we need more coordination and more common strategic culture.
Clara?
I would say simply engage, engage, engage.
And then?
Yeah, I would have said the same, but he said it 3 times, so I'm not repeating it.
I suppose engaging at all levels, isn't it?
I would say when you engage, be more self-confident when you engage. Don't let self-criticism, which is something very much appreciated in the European discursive realm, take over your external work, because in other regions that's not seen as a point of strength, but sometimes as a point of arrogance. So be more self-confident in being a value-oriented entity.
Okay. Stephen?
EU external action starts in the neighborhood. And so the credibility of the EU as a foreign policy actor depends on success in the neighborhood. It should be prioritized in an integrated fashion, bringing on board CFSP, CSDP with all the rest of the instruments and policies that the European Union has in its very rich toolbox.
And probably that will restore the confidence of the European citizens toward the EU, and security will not be the only thing they have in mind. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you to the public. I'm sorry you didn't take the floor, but I hope you enjoyed the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.